Um, so huge thanks to Ysaÿe and Eva and the whole organizing committee for allowing me to give this presentation. I'm really excited to be a part of this conference. I would like to talk to you today about a performer's creative gesture as a notion that came up in my PhD project working on Eugène Ysaÿe's acoustic discs. So the notion of gesture is now very popular in all different domains of research in music, and it gets this quite specific connotations in our field of early recordings, in work of Daniel H. Wilkinson or John Ring and others, and the word gesture came up many times during this conference. And this is the specific understanding of the gesture, which is performer's gesture. So the way in which the performer inflects the notes to convey his own understanding of the piece. And working on Ysaÿe's acoustic recordings and also reading his own thoughts about the role of the performer, I understood that the creativity component was very important for him in this understanding of his role as performer, and it helped me in analyzing his recordings. So let's start with the recording. So Eugène Ysaÿe was a Belgian violinist, but he recorded with a French pianist, Camille de Creuse, and they recorded in America. So the Belgianness of the recordings can be argued here. So they recorded between 1912 and 14 in different sessions on 12-inch discs, and there were these are only 12 short pieces for violin and piano. I would like to focus today on one example to be able to enter really in details. This is an example from the beginning of Mazurka of Wieniawski, the second Mazurka, opus 19. I recorded, as for the comparison, an interpretation that is kind of metronomical for you to listen, just for the comparison before listening to Ysaÿe. Let's listen to Ysaÿe immediately. Yeah, so this is a surprising reading of the rhythm written by Wieniawski. The first listening, it may sound a little bit like random or like very let's say, maybe a little bit clumsy for some people, but let's dig into like very detailed analysis I could perform. So, do I have a pointer here? Is it? Yeah. Okay. So I will take some time to explain what you see on the screen. The squares are the representation of the notes. Of the beginnings of the notes on the recording that I measured in sonic visualizer with that reverse conducting technique. The black lines here are aligned with each first note of the bar. But the dotted lines in the middle for the second and the third beat of each bar are equal divisions of each bar. So if the first bar is a little bit longer than the second, so each beat is a little bit longer here. This representation, in my experience, gave a much clearer representation of Ysaÿe's gestures than this more traditional representation by whole phrase, because his gestures are often more local than that, than the whole phrase. And the dots here represent the rhythm from the score in metronomical rendition, but adjusted to every bar. So the first bar is equally divided, the eighth note here is equally divided for the first bar. The eighth note of the first bar is longer than in the second bar. I hope that this is clear. So, is this clear? Yeah, okay. Okay. So thank you. Let's go to a few observations on that. So my first thing I was really struck after creating that is that Ysaÿe's third beat falls exactly on the metronomical division of the first bar, which is really surprising listening to this kind of very free rendition of the rhythm. And the same thing happens in the second bar. The third bar is a little bit different because he shortens all these notes and plays the last note on the third beat. But what he maintains is the structure of 1, 3, 1, 3, 1. And guess what? This is the precise structure of the mazurka. Mazurka is a Polish folk dance in 3 with an accent on the third beat, sometimes replaced to the second, but mainly the third beat. Sorry for that. So he maintains the structure of the dance in this really wild reading of the score. And the second thing is that he shortens these 2 8 notes that are put in a square and leaves a little silence after them before the next beat. So this creates some kind of suspension like this and helps him to fall with a nice accent on the first beat. And this really makes me think of the way the mazurka is danced. So not really translation of the movements of the dancers, but the main idea. So there's a lot of hopping in there, there's a lot of stamping, and this really makes this kind of gesture in the end of each part. So let's listen to it once more. Yeah, so I hope this proves a little bit of an internal logic of the premeditation in his playing. And another thing that might prove that is that he repeats the same thing every time this thing comes back. This is 6 times in the recording. And he repeats a similar gesture in the second theme of the same mazurka. So this is on top of the screen. He repeats the same gesture in the first mazurka by Wieniawski. He recorded both mazurkas on one 12-inch disc. And in other contexts too. So this is a piece of Ysaÿe, a rondino, where he also uses a similar gesture of shortening the notes to create this suspension before an important one. So. Yeah, and I also found an account of Ysaÿe's gesture like this in Brahms' concerto, which is a bit surprising to me too. So this is in Bachmann's encyclopedia. Interesting fact is that Ysaÿe wrote an introduction to this encyclopedia, so he must have been familiar with this representation of his gesture. So this is the score as presented by Bachmann, and he says that Ysaÿe played it like this, so shortening of these 2 notes and a suspension afterwards before the next beat. So it seems like it was very intentional, if it's logical, if it is repeatable. But why would Ysaÿe do that? Why would he change the rhythm so much? And here, I think Ysaÿe's own thoughts about performance can come and help. This is the first and last page of his manuscript that he wrote in just personal notebook. He wrote in total 16 pages of text and also some additions on the left part of the notebook. So that's a lot of text. This is held today in Royal Library of Belgium, this notebook. He wrote it in 1897 and titled simply Observations. In the first sentence, he mentions François Coppée. So he was a French writer, and the reading of an essay by Coppée very visibly struck Ysaÿe and triggered him to write this. I won't enter into political details around that, but Coppée really affirms in his text that performers are inferior than the authors. And he talks more in the realm of writing and writers as authors and comedians as performers. But at some point he goes into saying that it's like violinists. Everybody likes to listen to them, but their art finishes immediately after the performance. And this is for him an obvious proof that a performer's work is less valuable. So Ysaÿe was really clearly triggered by that, and he wrote it seems like he wrote in very fast pace, like putting all his thoughts on there, going around with different anecdotes and metaphors and comparisons, and he was just trying to explain why our work is valuable. And at some point he comes up with the neologism surcréateur, and he writes here that he uses this term that really expresses all his thoughts. And indeed, this notion seems to encapsulate three main points of Ysaÿe's approach to performance. As I could navigate in different approaches that he took in this text. So the first one is that performance work is secondary. He uses this word, but in the chronological order. We need the work of a composer to be performed. So the prefix sur in surcréateur could be translated over, or super also, assumes the existence of creation before the super creation. The second thing, that the performer's work is creative, he affirms that, and sometimes he even goes into calling it a new composition, the work of the performer, and so the super creation really clearly highlights the creativity part, and he also stretches very much the performance work is valuable in some instances as much as composers, but sometimes Ysaÿe goes into suggesting that it might be somehow higher of an art. So this super creation as this extra flair of something somewhat superior, and it also makes think about Nietzsche's philosophy, like Übermensch in German can be translated to Surhomme in French, Superman in English, and I haven't found a proof that Ysaÿe would read Nietzsche's philosophy before writing that, but it was already quite popular in French-speaking world by 1897. So to understand the degree into which Ysaÿe finds performers' creativity necessary, I prepared direct quotations from Ysaÿe. They are in French on the screen. I will try to translate it and comment part by part. So I quote, one could say that the genius of the writer, of the composer, proposes, and that the genius of the interpreter disposes. So this is a reference to a proverb that could be translated as humans, like man proposes and God disposes, meaning that we can make plans as humans, but God ultimately decides about our destiny. I continue. The artist's quintessence is the subject, expresses the substance and the form. He must be objective and subjective. He sometimes penetrates further than the author himself into the aesthetics of the subject. So here he really stretches the importance of very deep understanding of the piece, and I think it's really present in this Wieniawski example, where Ysaÿe does not focus on the notes, rather on the character, and this is his main goal. I continue. The artist gives relief to all these indispensable details that the author does not emphasize, does not write, that one does not imagine in simple reading. And I complement it with citation here from much further in the text. The performer will immediately emerge, sometimes imprinting a new direction, new accents, becoming the age of thought. So very clearly, very clear statement of Ysaÿe that there are indispensable details, not little details, these are accents and directions that are not written on the score and that the performer has to find and convey to the public. And this, and for Ysaÿe, this is not a display of abilities, not like a cheap virtuosity, let's say, but the conscious action really of conveying the sense, of enhancing the audience's perception. So in our perception, it might be something of performer's freedom, but for him, it was more a performer's responsibility, I would argue. So I would like to finish on auto-reflective, maybe very quick note. While preparing this presentation, I came back to my notes for the very first early recording conference, and that was organized by Ysaÿe and Eva in London, 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And there my presentation consisted of like a series of different expressive devices, let's say, that Ysaÿe uses. It's like portamentos and rubatos and bow expressions as like kind of isolated things, like some kind of strange, interesting tricks that I could collect from his recordings and use in my violin practice. So that was this maybe not fully conscious, but this notion of my violin practice as something stable, and I just borrow some tricks from Ysaÿe. And throughout my PhD and reflecting on Ysaÿe's thoughts about performance, analyzing his recordings by gesture rather than like little isolated things, my violin practice has completely been transformed. Like on, of course, like organological level, like really learning concrete things, of course, but also on this less conscious level, like things that I couldn't really describe, couldn't name, but that entered into my practice through emulation, through reenactment, stuff like this. But there's also this switch of my mindset as thinking about my role as performer, not as conveying only composer's intentions, being faithful to the score, being the messenger of a composer, but also getting getting back my full agency as a performer, to really embrace this my role and my responsibility as performer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna.